study that we present here relates to real-world data on the use of carfilzomib in relapsed myeloma patients, and we try to describe how carfilzomib is used in a real-world setting. And in this study, we are focusing on patients who have pre-existing cardiovascular comorbidities, and because these patients, we know that in general myeloma patients do have more cardiovascular complications because of their disease, but also because of the treatments that they receive, like dexamethasone. And in the studies with carfilzomib, there was a notion that there were more cardiac side effects. So there's a kind of warranty to be very cautious to use carfilzomib in patients with pre-existing cardiac disorders. So that's why we paid particular attention to this group of patients. So the primary aim of this study was to describe the use of carfilzomib, the dosing of the drug, the treatment regimens, the duration of the treatment, and also the reasons to discontinue. And the secondary objective was to describe the different patient groups and their different characteristics. The general outcome of this study was that in real world, the efficacy of this regimen was similar as observed in the clinical trials, with about 85% of responses for KRD, so carfilzomib in association with lenalidomide and dexamethasone, and about 75% for carfilzomib and dexamethasone. The patients in this study who came from 10 different countries, and in total there were 700 patients included. They were in general older, and carfilzomib Revlimid dexamethasone was used more in earlier lines of treatment, and carfilzomib dexamethasone in late lines of treatment. There were about 50% of patients who had cardiovascular comorbidities. These were defined as either the presence of a cardiologic disease or a vascular disease defined by presence of hypertension, diabetes, hypercholesterolemia, or renal disorders. And so when we look to these patients with pre-existing cardiovascular disorders, and generally they responded as well as the patients who didn't had any comorbidities. Now regarding to, as I mentioned, the responses are almost similar. We saw there were slightly more side effects in patients with cardiovascular disease, but these side effects were mostly hypertension, which is manageable, and there were no more serious, which means severe to grade 3 side effects in this patient group. So we can say that carfilzomib can be used in well-selected patients that already have some cardiac comorbidities, but I would recommend to physicians to take care to well select these patients, to do a relevant cardiac checkup before starting treatment, and to be very cautious for signs of cardiac failure during the first treatments. The patients, in general, the patients that are included in clinical studies, they are very fit patients. And in general, the inclusion criteria to participate in clinical trials are very strict. So it's very important, not only for us physicians, but also for society, to know that the results that are seen in clinical trials are also found in real-world patients.